everybody, it's Nick here with you. Welcome back to the channel. Toronto's MADLANDS are releasing their new record called Symphony for the End of Time this September. Their latest single, Armageddon, is out now. I am joined by the frontman of MADLANDS right now here on the channel. Brent, how's it going, man?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So this is the first time that you've been on the channel here talking about MADLANDS. How did you guys come together? What's the history of this band?
I think the why is a little bit more important than the how. I mean, we've all played in numerous bands over the years and have collaborated with each other, but I think there was a period where all of us kind of stepped away from music and for various reasons, which I can certainly get into a couple of them because it certainly relates to, I think, the inspiration behind the album to some extent. And we kind of, rediscovered our zest and passion, and here we are. But it was basically a culmination of a lot of, I think, not so great experiences interfacing with the industry, so to speak. And there was one particular moment that led to most of us kind of stepping away for a number of years, and it just kind of felt a little bit futile to fight the machine, so to speak. And basically, we were playing in another band, and it's a long story how we got there, and it was not a project that I was particularly proud of. We to give you the full story, I suppose we got signed fairly early on to, and we won a songwriting contest that led to us getting signed to a pretty big label and publishing deal, and then through that, we were obviously you're young and excited, and I think at that point there was a real innocence to what we were doing, and obviously when you start having commercial interests involved, the game changes a little bit, and it's not just about make songs that you like. It's trying to make sure that the investment makes sense and that you're reaching certain targets and quotas, and you start to lose yourself in that pursuit, because you're making music that obviously you're very proud of, and then all these people on the outskirts are kind of telling you, not good enough, not good enough, we need this, we need that. And it's a pretty cliche tale. I think a lot of people have endured this process, and then basically that band kind of flamed out and didn't reach the success based on the label and publisher's investment. And we essentially got offered a second deal with a new project, but it was kind of like a situation of, we'll give you some more funding, but you really have to play our game. And again, I mean, I think labels and people at labels, I think they're all just trying to succeed and make projects succeed. So I think it doesn't come down to individuals having some nefarious agenda per se. I think it really just comes down to the apparatus itself designed in a way that just doesn't really facilitate free expression of artists. And so we wound up playing in very much a pop band, and it just never felt quite right. It felt kind of contrived, and I think we were always wrestling with everything from a spiritual standpoint, because deep down you're aware, you're trying to convince yourself, no, 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 we just need to do this to get to the next step. And it led to us being on a television show a number of years back. It was a show called The Launch. It was a CTV Bell Media show. It was not this project, of course, previous project. And we performed one of our original songs to a couple of the judges, one of which was Ryan Tedder from One Republic.
Mhm.
And then, about 10 months to 12 months later, he's releasing a song in collaboration with a EDM duo called Galantis that sounds an awful lot like our song.
Oh man.
To put in context, our song was called "I Feel You in My Bones." Their song was called "Bones." I mean, I'll let people listen and make the call for themselves, but it obviously led to a very disenchanted state, and we actually did try to pursue it legally, but obviously you're facing quite the juggernaut in terms of
Mhm.
Bell Media and an artist of that magnitude. And I think at the time we just kind of threw in the towel and said, screw this. And I think it was an interesting time, because in addition to feeling this defeat, I mean, I really did feel like I lost myself creatively and artistically in that whole process. So we did step away for a number of years. And I mean, I think when you do that, because we were also a little bit older, we're certainly not spring chickens at this point. And I think you're waiting for someone to take up the mantle to kind of challenge some of these things, especially in the realm of rock music. I
Yeah.
grew up loving bands that were rebellious, and we're trying to take on the powers that be, so to speak, and the industry. And yeah, and no one did it. So here we are trying to do that essentially. But
Yeah.
it's been an inspiring process, because I think through the whole thing we've kind of rediscovered what led us to do this in the first place, and we're doing it all in our terms, and outside the purview of labels and publishers and all these people that in our experiences, despite maybe good intentions sometimes, definitely led us astray from where we want to go artistically.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And it seems like nowadays there is a lot of expectation on bands to be a certain way or to act a certain way or to be able to create in a certain way. And kind of speaking to your latest single, Armageddon, and watching the video, which I saw on Stingray Loud on TV, by the way, which is kind of a nice coincidence because, you kind of got to know your band a little bit before this conversation. It's obviously speaking to the age of social media. Content is king, algorithms trying to go viral, which everybody does that. I'm a content creator. Everybody's in that kind of game. So how do you balance that as a band? The expectation to create content just beyond the music, when in a lot of ways the music should just speak for itself.
Definitely. I think what we're trying to do is that, in order to kind of beat the game, you have to play the game to a certain extent.
Mhm.
But I think there's a difference between just being subservient to it and going along with expectation and actually trying to work within that apparatus to go against the grain. And that's proven difficult, to be honest. I mean, I'll be honest, we have had some struggles with even the content we've been pushing out to support the single, because obviously the video and for those that want to check it out, it's on YouTube. There's two versions, one semi-censored version and one uncensored version that's age restricted. And I think the commentary we're making obviously is not necessarily casting a positive light on social media in the current paradigm. But despite that, we're getting a lot of censorship, and it's kind of confusing to me, because I think that what we're trying to say is, hey, these things are not that great. Like, we should heed the warning. And certain social media platforms haven't liked our content so far. And what is funny is that we were leaning into some of the expectations in terms of the kind of content that you'd expect to perform well, and it did. But it did get taken down and removed. So we've been fighting some censorship, which makes the battle even a little harder. But I think one certainly worth fighting.
Yeah, and Chris, I guess a little bit of notoriety as well because you guys are working a little bit against the system, and like you're saying, a lot of artists are afraid to speak out or a little bit afraid to do things that are different or challenging because that might affect their reach or their visibility as a band. And it's nice to see a little bit of that rebellion coming back to rock music.
For sure, and I think it's always been a game of gatekeepers, and I think for a long time it was, music directors at radio stations, it was
Mhm.
AR people, heads of labels, heads of publishers, stuff like that. I think there are still gatekeepers, but the interesting thing now is that the gatekeepers aren't even human in a lot of cases. I mean, especially when
Mhm.
you look at social media,
Right.
you're trying to optimize within the framework of an algorithm that is literally a robot just making decisions based on habits. And I think that this is what's led to a very strange circumstance right now in terms of what's performing really well and what people are listening to. And I don't think it necessarily runs parallel with people's tastes. And a good example is, I think you need to hit certain target points throughout someone consuming your content in order to obviously get virality and rank higher in the algorithm. And so there's certain things that you have to do, hook people within the first 3 seconds, get them to that next point, 6 seconds, get them
Right.
halfway through the video, keep their hold their retention. And I think it becomes an interesting game. And at the end of the day, if you're just some regular dude sitting down, and sharing your thoughts, it's really hard to get people to stop. I mean, hence,
Mm.
to some extent, the look, and
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, what we try to do is I think we're trying to make sure that everything that we do has some artistic purpose and correlates to what we're trying to say through the music and through our album. And our album is really centered around this concept of narcissism, and I think at all levels, in terms of macroscopic and microscopic, and how it tends to damage the fabric of society and art and expression. And at the end of the day, you can't fall in love with your own reflection if you can't see your reflection.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And speaking to this new record, the first three songs that we've heard released from you guys, like "Prelude to the End of Time," is this epic, piano-driven intro. The video for that is very mysterious with you on the piano there. "The Witching Hour" and "Armageddon." It feels like they're telling a story. They're leading up to something greater. So, what can listeners expect in terms of the sound and the themes that they're going to hear on this new record?
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of a narrative, and we've really tried to have a through line throughout all the videos. So obviously, right now we're very much in the early phases. The album has 17 songs on it, so it's
Mhm.
quite a dense piece of work. And our game plan is to have at least one video accompanying each of the releases and each single from the album. So I will say it's a sprawling work artistically. I mean, I think, you know, we approached it in a very organic way, and basically it was just, we don't give a fuck, and we're just going to do what we want to do. And again, this is the nice thing about operating independently, and you know, we've been fortunate enough, and through a lot of hard work and hustle, to be able to kind of self-fund and self-release this whole thing. And everything we've done has been, you know, DIY. We have a very small team of people we work with outside the band, just in terms of, you know, for video work and stuff like that. Mitch Philly and Zach Nash have been our collaborators with all of the visual stuff, and they've been amazing to work with. And they're also people that we've known from the scene and from bands that we played in. So it doesn't really feel like we're really going externally, and they do feel like in some way, shape, or form part of the actual project.
Yeah, and everything that I've kind of seen in terms of the videos and the aesthetic of the band is very very cinematic, kind of almost gothic. I got a horror sci-fi vibe to it. Is that a big influence on the band and the overall aesthetic, that this kind of cinematic feel to it?
Yeah, for sure. I think that we're trying to establish a certain sensation and feeling, and I think, you know, one of my big arguments with rock music right now is that it just doesn't have any teeth. You know, it
Mhm.
just, everything feels very safe. You know, when people are, you know, heaping praise on the, you know, young bloods of the world and stuff like that. You know, I mean, great voice, whatever, but
Right.
it's just, it's so caricature. I mean, I feel like I'm watching, like, you know, those old Rock Band games. One of the selectable characters, like all the moves and all the rhetoric, it's just so cliche. And at the end of the day, you know, this is essentially a Disney kid, you know,
Mhm.
that's being, you know, kind of LARPing as a rock star. And I mean, I guess, you know, to some extent, our album really is kind of a love letter to the 90s in a way. And I
Mhm.
think a time when there really was this spirit of revolution and change.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, it was a unique time in the sense that labels kind of, I think, didn't really know what to do, because there's all this stuff and all this music and all these artists getting traction that they didn't quite understand. And as a result, it was kind of the Wild West, and everything was allowed to happen creatively. And I think that was a really special time. So I think to some extent we're trying to bring that back. And I think the imagery, you know, there's baseball bats and a little bit of a creepy horror element to it, and
Mhm.
it's very intentional. You know, I think we're trying to draw a line in the sand and say, you know, we're here to take on the machine, whatever the machine is, and the powers that be. And I think, you know, being at the age that we are, we're in a bit of a unique position that, you know, we've had a lot of failures, and we've gone through a lot. And I think that this is the disadvantage of young artists. And when you have someone that's 22 or 23, and they've signed their first record deal, or they've, you know, they're working with a manager for the first time, obviously I think there's a lot of scarcity mindsets and fear-based mindsets at play, because, and I know I've been there. You know, you really feel like, oh my gosh, this is my one chance, you know, the one shot that you get. And as a result, I think, you know, you really do defer a lot of your decision making and trust to people around you. And I don't think that's a good decision as an artist. You know, you should really own your own art and own your own ideas and your own voice. And like I said, I was there, so I definitely empathize with young artists. And you know, fortunately, we've stuck with it long enough, and we've endured many failures.
Mhm.
Again, that's a strange word to even unpack, but at the end of the day, you know, when you get to this age, you just stop giving a shit. And I think that that's
Yeah.
a really powerful place to be, because at the end of the day, you know, we really don't have anything to lose. And I think that that puts us in a unique position to, again, call things out and challenge things that a lot of younger artists aren't willing to do. I mean, going back to the concept of gatekeepers, I think that in addition to, you know, the social media algorithms and AI and all of these tools that, again, are removing the human from the decision making process. I think there are still some human gatekeepers in a lot of ways within the realm of rock music. It's become these kind of legacy acts. You know, I
Right.
think the way that a lot of young bands get opportunities is getting on a tour. You know, in the case of Youngblood, you know, featuring and collaborating with Aerosmith and Smashing Pumpkins, and
Yeah.
you know, and doing that kind of thing. And I think that this is where I feel a little bit, I guess, disenchanted again is the word, and a little bit let down, because, you know, I've obviously idolized a lot of these bands, and a lot of these people were my heroes growing up. And they kind of lingered along around so long, and at one point they were fighting, the man, the machine, and then eventually you
Yeah.
become the man and the machine. And I think music and art is a really interesting um, thing, in the sense that when you look at something like sports, if you want to kind of stay the champion, you have to keep winning.
Mhm.
You have to keep taking on the next challenger, and knocking the guy out in the middle of the ring in order to kind of keep your belt. And music has, I think, because of the capitalistic element of it, that obviously when someone has this monopoly in terms of reach, in terms of social relevance, in some cases just purely in terms of financial resources, they're able to kind of synthetically maintain that spot without really the artistic merit to back it up. And actually, I've actually a fan of your channel as well. I've watched a lot of your videos, especially the
Oh,
ones
thanks.
in terms of the pumpkins. I'm a huge pumpkins fan, and
Same.
and I appreciate the fact that you're also not afraid to you know call these people out, and it's not to shit on their legacy. I mean, these artists and some of these writers have written legitimately some of the greatest rock songs and the greatest rock albums of all time, but at the end of the day, like, that was a long time ago, and
Mhm.
what are you doing now? And if it's not great, then why are you still kind of sitting there in the middle of the ring with the
Mhm.
championship belt on, so to speak? And so I think at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to take on a little bit too.
Yeah, and that's the thing with bands. Yeah, like you're speaking to legacy bands like the Smashing Pumpkins, and there's always that argument with, especially with older bands, about their older music, which is the music that made them famous and the one that the fans resonate the most, versus their new music, and they're on album number whatever 12, 15, and then they're these bands are lasting. Even the Rolling Stones are still going, and they're 20 years before the Pumpkins. So these legacy bands kind of sticking around and maybe not leaving as much room for newer bands, and then fans of music may not be latching on to newer bands because they're still kind of stuck on the older stuff. So I can definitely understand how you kind of fight a little bit against that trend.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the fact that, you have a lot of young listeners looking back, rather
Hmm.
than looking at the present, or looking forward, I think kind of says it all. There was this rapture point, whether it was 2008, 2010, I don't know, whatever arbitrary year you want to draw the line at, but
Hmm.
it seems like music just became content and a commodity,
Right.
and it stopped being art. And so I mean, I can't remember a lot of things beyond, say, 2010. That really seems to, again, have a legacy where people are
Hmm.
still listening to it, and championing it in the same way that people talk about the Led Zeppelins and the Nirvanas and Green Days and Smashing Pumpkins of the worlds. And I think that that's a sad reality that we live in. And and at the end of the day, I think a lot of these artists that have this platform because of that previous history and success, I mean, it's sad that they're not leading the charge. I mean, I see a lot of them kind of playing into the paradigm, and again, playing the game of like, well, we got to do the collaboration with
Hmm.
the 23-year-old artist to stay relevant and access young fans. And um, yeah, it's just it's a bit sad. And I feel like the we talk about this a lot internally within our band, that the two major subgenres of rock music right now, we have our own terms for them, but I call it capitalist rock and nepo rock. These are
Yeah.
the two things. You have these bands, and a lot of them being legacy bands, that the sole purpose and the sole intention behind the album, or or the songs, is to sell a product. And it doesn't even matter. I mean, the fact that these bands will release an album every year and not play any of these songs on the tour, I mean,
Hmm.
I think there's a misalignment there. You know what I mean? Because if they were really writing art and music that they felt passionate about, and that they felt had merit and lasting appeal, and I think that these would be finding their way into band sets. But the fact that
Hmm.
they're not, I think, says a lot. And then you have the other subgenre that I call nepo rock, where you have
Yeah.
Violet Girl releasing where Squirrel and the Souffle, or whatever the fuck her song's called, with and it's kind of, it just feels like LARPing, and it
Right.
really feels like a masquerade of pretending to be Nirvana, in 2026. And
Hmm.
Nirvana, those songs had one writer, three writers, I suppose, if you want to credit the rest of the band, where that song, was it Bug in the Cake, or whatever
Hmm.
the hell it's called, but there's like 6, 7 writers on it, and
Yeah.
I think that when it comes to integrity and authenticity, I mean, that used to be, I think, the really foundation of rock music, and all of those pillars have essentially just crumbled, and no one seems to
Right.
care. But I think the audience does care, but I think the audience also is really hungry for rock music. That if all they have is these legacy acts putting out their kind of capitalist rock albums, then
Mhm.
people will consume it because they don't want to, you know, go pop on Taylor Swift or whatever the hell else is happening in
Right.
the other sphere of music, right?
Yeah. Yeah, writing this music by committee kind of thing, right? Like you're
Exactly.
saying before, back in the day, you had one writer, a couple of writers, Lennon McCartney, whatever, right? But now it's yeah, writing by committee, having all these people in on a song that doesn't necessarily reflect that it would have that many writers. You wouldn't think that it would take that many people to write a good song. Like I feel like the less people involved, the better, because you're getting more of a singular vision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the issue with having songwriting by committee, I mean, we even deal with some of these things internally within our own band. You know, when you have four, five, six people, trying to get everyone to align behind the same vision, the same idea is very difficult, you know, and that's why I'm actually really grateful for the band members I play with, because everyone kind of comes with a very positive mindset, and there is really a strong sense of unity in terms of vision and intention. But it gets very difficult, you know. It becomes like working within a company, you know, and it just
Mhm.
becomes this strange bureaucratic process that everyone has to sign off on. You know, is that pre-course too long? You know, is the course lyric, is
Right.
that just right? You know, and it's just
Yeah.
ridiculous. And at the end of the day, I mean, I think music is supposed to capture, you know, the zeitgeist of that moment, and you know, and it's very difficult to do that when the process is so convoluted and you have
Yeah.
so many, you know, basically cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this new record. Symphony for the End of Time is going to be coming out in September. You're saying it's 17 tracks, which is pretty ambitious, and you guys are hoping to release each track individually and do a video. So, kind of what's coming up next for Madlands?
Yeah, we have two videos coming out. I think probably some throughout summer and fall, and two more singles at some point. And like I said, there is a narrative that it's a loose narrative, but for those that want to dig deep, there is a narrative through all of the videos, and there's a concept there. And you know, I would say expect the unexpected. I think, you know, obviously the first couple tracks have had a certain vibe. You know, definitely a undercurrent of, say, you know, gothy, heavy radio rock, whatever you want to call it. But you know, there's a lot of diversity on the album. You know, we all come from very disparate backgrounds musically, and it's been really exciting to just, you know, rather than with past projects where we've really tried to, you know, again, play the game and think, you know, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. We have to align perfectly to fit into, you know, this box. You know, we kind of threw out that model out the window, and it's just, you know, the best idea and the best song wins every time, regardless of what style or subgenre it happens to fall in. And it's been really exciting. And I felt that, you know, because I had a little bit of a weird upbringing musically. You know, I was always playing in bands since a really young age, and so that kind of oral tradition of rock music and playing by ear and playing with other people and collaborating. But I was
Mhm.
also, you know, a very learned classical musician. And I know when I was younger, it was almost like kind of embarrassed to say that, you know, I'd studied classical music. And I'm like, you know, in my spare time listening, you know, Bach and you know, Beethoven
Mhm.
and Liszt and whoever else. And it's been kind of liberating to be able to embrace those inspirations and to find that hybridity between, you know, obviously rock music, which I love, and that kind of, you know, classical art music tradition, and finding a way to incorporate it all.
Yeah, and I get, like you were saying, kind of Smashing Pumpkins being one of your favorite bands. I can definitely see that influence in the band and the videos released. Prelude to the End of Time almost has a melancholy and the infinite sadness kind of vibe to it. That piano intro going into the to the other songs. And then in terms of like the aesthetic of the band and going into to a live setting, like are you guys planning on doing some live shows? How do you translate what you're doing and the general vibe of the band into a live performance?
We're trying to do things that just keep us excited, and you know, we've all played in bands and toured for many years, and I think the paradigm of, you know, band goes on beer stained stage in club,
Mhm.
plays to, you know, 100 to
Been
200
there.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, 30 minutes, walk off stage, everyone applauds, you know, and you know,
Mhm.
you all go home. And I mean, again, it's not to say that that environment can't create magical moments. It certainly can. When you have
Mhm.
someone that's just really in the zone, and you have an audience that's really engaged. I mean, I've been part of some really magical evenings and performances, but I think trying to up the ante and make things a little bit more exciting and, again, unexpected, because I think, you know, everyone's been doing this. And I mean, over the years, you know, I think especially when it comes to smaller local communities and scenes, you know, it really has been dwindling away. And I mean, it's a combination of factors, obviously. I mean, you know, COVID didn't help that anything, and the economic circumstances have made it difficult for certain smaller venues to survive and thrive. But I think, our plan is to rather than have traditional concert experiences, I would say just more artistic experiences. So
Right.
we are planning we are planning a show in Hamilton actually, and it will
Nice.
probably take place, end of summer or early fall. And it's going to be a bit more of an exclusive invite only kind of thing, and there will be opportunities for anyone that wants to come
Mhm.
to kind of figure out how to get there. But we're going to be shooting it in one of the spots that we actually shot one of our music video, or sorry, we're going to be performing in one of the
Perfect.
spaces that we did one of our music videos, and it's going to be I think a unique experience. And again, we're not even sure of how it's going to go. And I think that that's the thing that's exciting. I think as an artist, you always have to take risks. And again, there's not a lot of risks taking place anymore. So I think
Yeah.
as much as it can feel uncomfortable, and you're unsure of whether this is the right decision and maybe we should just go the traditional route. I mean, I think we're just trying to do things that keep us excited and engaged.
For sure. And so yeah, we're looking forward to, seeing the live show. And so this new album, Symphony for the End of Time, it comes out in September. Do we have an exact date yet, or is it still just September that's looking like the release window?
Tentatively, September 11th was the date.
Okay.
That may change, subject to
Okay.
change. Just we're in the process of actually we just actually are still kind of tracking and recording. We just wrapped up one last song, one last addition to the record,
Right.
and I think we're just trying to be a little bit open ended with it and do things when they feel right, opposed to being too methodical about the process,
Right.
much to the dismay of other people on our team. But we're working through
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, that's always the thing, right? Is trying to balance the, the people that are trying to help you guys get out there a little bit, but then with your own artistic endeavors and your goals and everything like that. It's always the balance. And I've just really enjoyed what we've heard so far. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing the rest of the record and seeing you guys live and seeing how Madlands continues to evolve.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. We really appreciate that.
Right on. Brent from Madlands, and you can check them out online. What's the website if everybody wants to check it out?
I think it's madlandsband.com, and Madlands Band is our social media handle for everything. So Instagram, TikTok, you can find us.
Perfect. Madlands, the new record, Symphony for the End of Time, comes out in September. Thanks a lot for making the time, Brent. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.